What if one dance could silence cruelty, awaken buried grief, and ignite a second chance at life? In a crowded school gym, laughter turned cruel when children mocked a little girl for the braces on her legs. But then, a man who had built his life on power and success stepped forward. He lifted her into his arms, not just to dance, but to remind her and himself that brokenness does not erase worth. What began as a simple gesture became the spark for something far greater, a journey of healing, of hope rediscovered, and of love found where no one expected. This is not just a story about charity. It is about legacy, belonging, and the power of being seen. Stay with us, and if you believe in the beauty of second chances, please subscribe to Loss and Healing. The gymnasium smelled faintly of floor polish and store-bought cookies, the kind of sweetness that lingered in the air but never felt warm. Streamers dangled lazily from ceiling fans. Balloons floated half-deflated against the corners, and a DJ fumbled clumsily with his playlist. Children squealed as they darted across the floor, sneakers squeaking, dresses swishing, their laughter bouncing off the walls in an uneven rhythm that was more noise than joy. Parents stood in clusters with paper cups of punch, their conversations polite but distracted, as if waiting for an excuse to leave. The cheerfulness felt manufactured, stitched together like a costume that fit poorly. Grant Whitmore stood near the back wall, detached in his tailored navy suit, holding a plastic cup of water he never intended to drink. His presence there had been an obligation, not a choice. The principal had urged him to attend after his generous donation to the fundraiser. And though Grant had agreed without complaint, regret pressed against him now. He belonged in boardrooms with clean lines and decisive voices, not in a school gym buzzing with artificial joy. Numbers and presentations filled his mind, the kind of thoughts that offered control, unlike this chaotic noise that grated on his composure. He checked his watch. 20 minutes, he told himself. 20 minutes of courtesy and he would leave. And then he heard it. A sharp sound that sliced through the static of the evening. It was not laughter born of joy, but of cruelty. His gaze shifted, instinct pulling him toward the source. Near the refreshment table, a cluster of boys pointed and snickered. Their mocking whispers drifted across the floor. She cannot even stand. Why come to a dance? The words stung, not because they were aimed at him, but because he knew with cold certainty what they meant for the one they mocked. At the far wall, a little girl sat alone. Her pink dress was wrinkled, her white shoes scuffed at the toes. Metal braces wrapped stiffly around both her legs, and a pair of small crutches lay neatly beside her like quiet witnesses. Her hair, tied into two ponytails with faded ribbons, framed a face that carried no tears, but carried weight nonetheless. Her jaw was clenched, her eyes fixed downward, as though willing her legs to vanish from view. She did not ask for pity. She asked only to be unseen, and then in the barest whisper, Grant heard her murmur two words that froze him where he stood. "Please move!" The room faded around him, colors drained from the scene until only that voice remained. In an instant, he was not in a school gym anymore. He was 16, standing in a sterile hospital corridor, watching his sister Grace sit on the edge of her bed, her eyes hollow, her legs unmoving. The same stillness, the same resignation. He had buried that memory beneath years of strategy and power, but the cruelty in this gym ripped it back to the surface. Rage stirred inside him, not hot and reckless, but deep and unyielding, the kind that hardens like stone in the ribs. Another boy snickered, nudging his friend. She probably just came for the snacks. Their mockery might have continued, but Grant's eyes cut toward them with such force that the sound died in their throats. They shuffled uneasily, pretending to laugh at something else. Without a thought, Grant placed his untouched cup on the nearest table and stepped forward. The crowd parted slightly, curiosity flickering, confusion murmuring, but no one stopped him. The music played on, oblivious to the shift in the air. He walked with a steadiness that belonged to boardrooms, the kind that commanded attention without words. But this was different. This was not a performance, not an act of image or reputation. This was personal. He crossed the room until he stood before the girl. She did not look up. Her eyes remained fixed on her lap, her small hands clenched together as though bracing herself against more ridicule. Grant lowered himself slowly, first to a crouch, then to his knees, until they were level. For the first time in years, his voice carried not the authority of a CEO, but the gentleness of a brother. "Would you honor me with a dance?" Her head lifted, startled, blue eyes wide, searching, then narrowing with skepticism. "But I cannot stand," she whispered. His lips curved into a small smile. "Then I suppose we will find another way." Silence stretched between them, fragile and delicate. The boys near the refreshment table watched, whispering again, but their voices were fading. The girl glanced at them, then back at Grant. Her jaw tightened, but then, slowly, she reached out. Her fingers trembled as they slipped into his. Small, delicate, fragile but filled with trust. Grant's chest tightened as he rose, lifting her gently not to her feet but into his arms. She leaned slightly against his shoulder, not hiding, but steadying herself. The gym fell silent. The DJ hesitated, uncertain, but the music carried on, a slower rhythm now, as though it too understood the moment. Grant swayed softly, one arm supporting her back, the other beneath her knees, each step measured. It was not a dance of elegance but of defiance, a waltz born from resilience. Her arms came around his neck, tentative at first, then firmer, as though she too understood that something was shifting. The crowd whispered, but the cruelty was gone. Teachers dabbed at their eyes. Parents lowered their phones. Children stared wide-eyed. Grant saw none of it. He saw only her, the little girl who had entered the room mocked and diminished, now held in the center of it, weightless, belonging. Her brow relaxed, her eyes softened. The pain gave way to something new. Not a smile, not yet, but wonder. When the music ended, he lowered her gently back into her chair. She did not let go right away. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saying yes." He bowed his head slightly. "Thank you for giving me the honor." He rose, facing the silent crowd, his eyes speaking what words could not. "Do not forget what you saw." Then he pulled up a chair beside her, making it clear he was not going anywhere. The noise of the gym returned, laughter, music, announcements, but it no longer mattered. For in that corner of the room, a girl named Ellie sat taller, her crutches at her side, her spirit unbroken. And for the first time in years, Grant Whitmore felt something shift inside his chest. It was not charity, not duty, but something far greater, something that felt like the first step toward home. The night had settled over the city with its usual cloak of quiet, but inside Grant Whitmore's penthouse, silence had a weight all its own. The space gleamed with glass and steel, every surface pristine, every line sharp. Yet instead of luxury, the apartment felt hollow, like a museum of absence. He walked barefoot across the polished floor, his reflection trailing him across the wide windows that framed the skyline. The city lights sparkled against the mist, but he barely noticed. His gaze lingered instead on the one object that stood apart from the curated Perfectiona single photograph. It sat on a shelf, the only personal thing he had allowed into this sterile world. A young girl, 17, with a hospital bracelet still on her wrist, smiled faintly from behind the glass. His sister, Grace. She had once dreamed of dancing again, and she never had the chance. Grant sat heavily on the edge of his couch, a glass in hand, untouched. He had poured the drink as though habit demanded it, but his throat refused it. The words echoed in his mind, soft but piercing, "Please move." Ellie's voice and Grace's voice merged until he could no longer separate the two. It was not just the cruelty of children mocking a girl at a school dance. It was the memory of a sister whose pleas had gone unheard, whose life had slipped away while he watched powerless. His jaw tightened as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. The regret was familiar, but tonight it refused to be buried. Tonight, it demanded to be faced. His phone buzzed on the counter, shattering the stillness. He let it ring twice before lifting it. Clara, his assistant. "Sir, I just wanted to remind you, the investor pitch tomorrow morning has been moved up. They're flying in from Boston.
What's on your
We'll
mind
start
today?
at 7:45 so you can prep." Her voice was crisp, efficient, a rhythm he usually found grounding. Tonight, it felt foreign. He glanced at the drink beside him, untouched, then at Grace's photo. "Push it," he said. There was a pause. "Excuse me?" "The pitch." "Reschedule it." Another silence, heavier this time. "Sir, with all respect, these investors—" I said, "Push it." His tone left no room for argument. Clara hesitated. "Is everything all right?" He closed his eyes, his voice low, certain. "No, but it will be." He ended the call before she could answer. He sat still, the hum of the city muffled beyond the windows. His eyes fell to a small object tucked beside Grace's photo. A pair of child-sized ballet slippers, soft and pale, the satin dulled by years. He had forgotten they were there. They caught the light faintly, a relic of a promise never fulfilled. Grace had wanted to dance again. He had wanted to believe he could save her, but the treatments were delayed, the insurance tangled, the system too slow. She slipped through the cracks. No one had danced with her. He pressed a hand against his chest, as though the weight might ease. Maybe that was why Ellie's whisper had pierced so deep, because it was not the first time he had heard it. He had heard it in the hospital, when Grace thought he was asleep in the chair beside her. Please move, please just move. And no one had. The night stretched on, sleepless. By dawn, Grant was already dressed, his tie abandoned on the counter, a coffee cooling in his hand. He stood by the window, the city waking slowly beneath him, the ache in his chest steady. He picked up the phone again, his decision already made. "Clara," he said when she answered groggily. "I need a number." "A number?" she asked, confused. "The principal. Dalton, from the fundraiser. I want to speak with the student's mother." Her voice sharpened, suspicion layering beneath professionalism. "For what purpose? Is this about another donation?" "No," he said firmly. "It's about a little girl who reminded me of someone I failed." His voice cracked faintly, then steadied. Clara hesitated. "What's her name?" "Ellie Mason." There was a long silence on the line. "Grant, you know I can't just give out private information. That isn't how this works." He rubbed the bridge of his nose, tired but resolute. "I'm not asking you to break rules. Call Principal Dalton. Tell her I want to follow up on the fundraiser. Say I'm interested in sponsoring adaptive programs for kids with mobility challenges. Then ask if she can reach out to Ellie's mother on my behalf. If she's open to talking, she can call me directly. If not, I'll respect that." Clara exhaled slowly, the weight of his request sinking in. "You really mean that?" "Every word," he replied. "No back doors, no pressure. Her choice." "Finally," Clara said softly. "All right, I'll make the call." When the line went silent, Grant stayed by the window, the morning sun casting long streaks of light across the floor. He did not know if Rachel Mason would ever answer, but at least she would have the choice. That was more than Grace ever had. He leaned against the glass, his reflection looking back at him not as a CEO, not as the man who built empires, but as a brother who had once failed and a man who refused to fail again. The decision brought no peace, but it carried direction. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The apartment complex sat on the edge of the city, a tired building with bricks stained by years of rain and mildew. The rusted chain-link fence leaned at angles, and an old satellite dish clung to the third floor like a forgotten relic. Grant parked his SUV at the curb, its polished shine looking oddly out of place among the cracked pavement and duct-taped mailboxes.
No, thank you.
He stepped out, blazer draped over his arm, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The humid air clung to him as he crossed the walkway, his shoes echoing against the worn concrete. Neighbors glanced up. A boy on a too-small bike pedaled past barefoot. A man walking a dog paused to stare. Grant did not slow. He had faced boardrooms with eyes sharper than these. But this walk, up these stairs, carried a weight he had not felt before. The hallway smelled faintly of cooking oil and antiseptic. Tiles were chipped, patches uneven. At the top of the stairs, taped to a wooden door, was a paper plate scrawled with bright marker. "Ellie's room, no monsters allowed." The R in room was backward, the smiley face crooked but cheerful. His chest tightened. He knocked. A pause, then the scrape of a chair, the soft shuffle of feet. The lock clicked, and the door opened slowly. Rachel Mason stood there, hand braced on the frame as though steadying herself. Her faded t-shirt hung loose, hair pulled into a messy bun, eyes guarded. Her skin was pale, too pale, as if exhaustion had become her second skin. "Yes?" she asked, her voice soft but firm, ready to defend against whatever might come. Grant offered a small smile. "Miss Mason, I am Grant Whitmore. We met briefly at the school fundraiser. I danced with Ellie." Her posture shifted, not relaxed, but less rigid. "Right. You are the CEO. I am just a man who shared a dance with your daughter," he said gently. "If you are willing, I would like to talk about her." For a long second, she hesitated, suspicion flickering in her eyes. Then she stepped back, opening the door. "You better come in." The apartment was small but orderly, every corner filled with evidence of survival on a shoestring. A folding table doubled as a dining space. A bookshelf sagged beneath stacks of picture books and medical documents. The living room bore crayon drawings taped to the walls, a mattress in the corner neatly made with a stuffed rabbit resting on top. Rachel eased herself into a chair with a soft groan. Forgive the mess. The air conditioning has been out 2 summers, but the landlord keeps promising. Grant shook his head lightly. There is nothing to forgive. Before he could say more, the faint tap of crutches echoed in the hall. Ellie appeared in the doorway, her t-shirt proclaiming future astronaut, pajama pants mismatched with socks. She stopped, her eyes wide, then softened into recognition. You came? She asked, almost surprised but not fearful. I told you I would, Grant replied. A small smile tugged at her lips. She crossed the room carefully, her crutches clicking in rhythm before settling onto the mattress. Picking up a crayon, she resumed her drawing as though his presence had already been accepted. Grant's throat tightened at her quiet trust. Rachel watched, wary. She is not used to strangers keeping promises. Grant met her eyes. I intend to keep this one.
No, you are.
Silence stretched. Then Rachel asked bluntly, So what is this really about, Mr. Whitmore? You going to write a check and feel better about yourself? His jaw tightened. He had written countless checks, yes, but none had ever filled the hollow. He shook his head. I have written a lot of checks in my life, and they never fixed what mattered. This is not about money. This is about Ellie. She is not a problem to solve. She is a person. A child with determination most adults cannot imagine. I wanted to understand her story and yours. Rachel's eyes glistened with something between anger and fatigue. She scoffed softly. Her story is not special. She got sick. They missed it. Doctors say maybe the nerves will heal. Maybe they will not. Meanwhile, we wait. Insurance ran out months ago. Medicaid delayed. I lost my job trying to be her driver, therapist, teacher, everything. That is the story. Grant nodded slowly. No one should have to carry all that alone. Her gaze sharpened. And what are you going to do? Build another project? Put our names on a plaque? Call it charity? His voice dropped, even and steady. No, I had a sister, Grace. She wanted to dance too. She never got the chance. We ran out of time. No one stepped in, and I have lived with that ever since. Rachel blinked. The guarded wall in her eyes flickered for just a moment. Shared pain passed silently between them. Before either could say more, Ellie looked up from her drawing. Mom, look, I made him. She held up the page. A crayon sketch of her and Grant dancing in the gym.
Very good, baby.
It is a perfect dance.
Ellie, would you like to keep dancing?
Yes.
She tilted her head.
Wonderful.
Like this? Not exactly, he said softly. There is a doctor I trust. Someone who helps kids with strong hearts like yours. No cameras, no press. Just
We are looking
a chance.
forward to the future.
Rachel looked wary, suspicion heavy in her eyes, but she did not dismiss it outright. We will listen, she said finally. That is all I can promise. That is all I ask, Grant replied. As he stood to leave, Ellie hobbled to the door on her crutches. She stopped him with a question that pierced straight through. Do you think I will really dance again? He knelt, meeting her gaze. I think you already are. Her smile bloomed wide, brighter than the crooked sun taped to her wall. Rachel's voice was quieter now, but steady. Thank you. Grant nodded, his own voice hushed. Tomorrow I will call with the appointment. He left the apartment, the heat pressing against him as he stepped into the street. His phone was already in his hand. Dr. Harlan, he said when the line connected. I need a consult. 6-year-old girl, post-viral onset. Braces, no excuses, the best you have. He slipped Ellie's drawing into his pocket, the crayon colors smudging against his palm. A little girl believed she could still dance. And maybe, just maybe, he could learn to believe again too. The clinic did not look like the hospitals Grant remembered. Its walls were painted in warm, neutral tones, with soft lighting that made the rooms feel less like places of sickness and more like sanctuaries. Children's artwork hung framed in the hallways, and the smell of antiseptic was muted by the faint aroma of fresh coffee from a small kiosk in the lobby. Grant had chosen this place carefully, not because it was the most expensive, but because it was private, thorough, and humane. He had read about Dr. Harlan years ago, a man who treated children not as cases but as people, a specialist who once helped restore partial mobility to a girl paralyzed after a snowboarding accident. That memory had stayed with him, not the medical report, but the way the doctor had spoken to the child with hope, with honesty. From the observation window, Grant watched Ellie perched on the edge of the exam table, her small legs wrapped in braces. She swung them gently, more out of nervous energy than play. Rachel sat beside her, fingers entwined with her daughter's, her posture tense, protective. Grant felt his own chest tighten, as though he were the one about to receive a diagnosis. The nurse beside him spoke quietly. Families like theirs, they have probably been told 5 different things by 5 different doctors. Hope starts to feel more dangerous than truth. Grant nodded faintly. He knew that feeling too well. Dr. Harlan entered the room with a calm presence, his tablet tucked under one arm. He greeted Ellie first, crouching to her eye level, asking about the stickers on her crutches. She giggled softly, loosening the air. Grant felt the corner of his own mouth twitch upward. This was the right choice. Later, when the examination ended, Harlan stepped into the hallway to speak with Grant privately. "She is strong," he said, tapping his screen. "Stronger than most children I see. Smart too, frighteningly so. Her condition is transverse myelitis, viral onset. It went undiagnosed too long, and it damaged the spinal cord." But he paused, lifting his eyes to meet Grant's. "There is a window, not wide but real. With early intensive therapy, she might recover partial to full function. No guarantees. But not hopeless either." Grant exhaled slowly, his shoulders heavy with relief. "Would you take her case?" "I already have," Harlan said. When Ellie and Rachel emerged, the doctor crouched down again. "You have strong muscles here," he said, tapping Ellie's temple. "And here," he added, pressing lightly over her heart. "Now we just have to remind your legs they are part of the team." Ellie giggled, nodding as though it were a challenge she intended to win. Rachel's expression did not soften into a smile, but her eyes glimmered with something less rigid. Trust came slow, but perhaps it was starting. Grant did not want Rachel and Ellie commuting across the city every day, especially not from that old apartment with broken air conditioning and narrow stairwells. He had already found something better. A fully accessible unit stood across the street from the clinic. Its ground floor entrance wide enough for wheelchairs, its hallways bright with natural light. The building was quiet, clean, and safe. When he walked through the space, he did not send an assistant. He checked the details himself. He ran a measuring tape across door frames, leaned against counters, tested the grip of new safety rails. The kitchen sink was lowered so Ellie could reach it. The bathroom fitted with custom rails, the washer and dryer replaced with front-load models she could use independently one day. The contractor asked him, half joking, "You expecting someone important to move in?" Grant's answer was simple, yes. When Rachel saw it, she froze in the doorway. Ellie squeezed her hand tight, eyes darting from the balcony to the wide living room to the soft gray couch that already looked like it had been waiting for them. "This is too much," Rachel whispered. "It is just right," Grant said quietly. "And it is temporary until you decide otherwise." She turned to him, her voice low but trembling. "You have done more in 2 days than anyone else has in a year." He shook his head. "I did not do enough back then. This is me doing better." Ellie's crutches clinked as she explored each room, pausing when she found the sketchbook and colored pencils he had left on a shelf. She turned, her smile bright. "You remembered?" "Of course," he replied. That evening, instead of attending a high-profile investor dinner, Grant sat at the dining table with Ellie while Rachel warmed soup in the new kitchen. Clara called him twice. He ignored both. The air inside this apartment was different, warmer, imperfect, alive. Ellie chatted about her favorite animals, declaring that ducks were underrated compared to flamingos. Grant chuckled. Later, while Rachel spoke softly with a caseworker on the phone, Ellie handed him a small box. Inside lay a bracelet, bright beads strung together, uneven but beautiful. "I made it," she said proudly. "Because you didn't leave." He looked at it for a long moment, then slipped it on beside his watch. The plastic colors caught the light next to the polished steel. "It suits you," she added with certainty. He smiled. "Better than the Rolex." She grinned and leaned against him. That night, when Grant returned to his penthouse, the silence did not weigh on him the way it had before. He walked through the rooms with the bracelet still on his wrist. He paused at Grace's photograph, then at the ballet slippers beside it. The glitter from Ellie's bracelet caught the dim light, softening the steel edges of the room. For the first time in years, he sat at his desk and opened a notebook he had not touched in over a decade. He wrote only one line: "Hope is not a plan, but it might be a beginning." He closed the notebook gently, feeling something inside him shift. Perhaps he was no longer walking through an empty museum. Perhaps he was learning how to build a home again. The therapy room was filled with the steady hum of determination.
You make me
Ellie
so
stood between
proud.
two parallel bars, her braces snugly fastened, her forehead glistening with sweat. Rachel hovered at the edge, hands pressed to her mouth, her entire body trembling with
Okay,
hope and
I'll
fear.
listen.
Grant remained just behind the therapist, silent but unwavering, his heart pounding as if each
Please do
small
not
movement
leave.
of Ellie's legs echoed inside his own chest.
I will not go
She counted under her breath, as she always
Will I
did.
dance again?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The ritual steadied her. For a moment, nothing happened.
You already are.
Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, her left foot trembled and pushed forward an inch. Her right followed, completing a full step. The sound of Rachel's gasp filled the room, raw and unrestrained. And for the first time in months, Ellie's smile broke through the sweat and strain. "I did it," she whispered. Her therapist high-fived her, and Grant's chest tightened with a pride he had not felt in years. He knelt beside her. "Ellie, you just proved gravity has nothing on you." She giggled, wobbly but radiant. Rachel dropped to her knees, pulling Ellie into her arms, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, joy filled the room like sunlight. But joy, fragile as glass, can crack without warning. That evening, back in the apartment, Rachel moved slower than usual. Her skin was pale, her breathing
These are
shallow.
great stickers.
Ellie, still glowing from her triumph, did not notice, but Grant did. He watched her hands tremble
We
as
are
she tried to
very
steady
hopeful
herself
about your
against the
progress.
counter. When she bent to
Oh,
help
that's
Ellie brush her
wonderful news.
teeth, her knees
We did
buckled.
everything we
He
could
caught
to
her
help him
before she
recover.
fell. Within 20
Sounds
minutes,
better.
she was back at the
Ah,
clinic,
I
machines
see.
humming softly
Your
around her.
condition is serious,
The
but
diagnosis
with the
came
right
quickly.
treatment and
An
determination,
autoimmune
a full
flare,
recovery is possible.
undiagnosed lupus, her body collapsing under the weight of stress and exhaustion. Grant stood at her bedside, his jaw tight. The doctor's words
Yes, I
cut
will
him to
take
the
the
core.
case.
She has been putting
thank
everyone
you.
else
Thank you so
first.
much.
That is not sustainable. Ellie sat curled in
You
a
are
chair
such a
nearby,
strong girl.
hugging her stuffed rabbit, her expression eerily calm. When Grant crouched beside her, she looked
you are
up.
all good now.
Is she going to die? His throat clenched, but his voice was steady. "No, sweetheart.
I just
She
want to
just
make sure
needs
you're
help
safe.
now, the same way you did." Ellie nodded, quiet but certain, as if she had expected this all along. He brushed her hair back gently. "She will not fall again. I promise." Ellie leaned against him, trusting that promise. The next 24 hours moved in a blur. Grant authorized full medical coverage under what he called the Grace Project, naming it after his sister. He arranged for a private nurse with
All
pediatric
right, everything looks
experience
good. We're
to
on track.
stay with Rachel during her
Agreed.
recovery. He worked the phones with a ferocity his board would have recognized. But this time, it was not about profit margins.
wow, look at
It was
that.
about survival, about dignity, about love. Still, the logistics were not what haunted him. It was the moment he walked into Rachel's hospital room late
It is
that
too
night,
much.
finding her half awake, feverish, and frustrated. Her voice rasped. "You are doing too much." His answer came without hesitation. "Not enough." She tried to smile, but it faltered. "I hate being the reason Ellie worries." Grant sat on the edge of her bed, his hand covering hers. "You are not the reason she worries. You are the reason she believes." He stayed long after she fell asleep, listening to the rhythm of the machines, watching Ellie curled on the couch with her rabbit, whispering into the dark, "Promise you won't let her fall." His voice was quiet but unshakable.
Flamingos
"I
to
won't."
be with the
The weight of those words
No, they
anchored him
won't.
more than any contract he had
Look what I
ever
made
signed.
for you.
Because this was not just about Ellie anymore. It was about Rachel, about the woman who had held the world together with duct tape and prayers, who had carried her child through storms that should have broken her. It was about family, not the kind forged by bloodlines or legality, but by presence, sacrifice, and the refusal to let go. The following morning, Grant stood at the hospital window with a cup of cold coffee, watching the sun rise over the city. The reflection staring back at him was no longer the CEO who measured his worth in numbers and mergers. It was a man who had made a promise, and he would not leave. When Rachel grew stronger, he placed the paperwork before her, documents outlining the mission of the Grace Project: pediatric neurorehabilitation, housing support, travel stipends, mental health services, in-home care assistance and infrastructure for second chances. "It is not charity," he said. "It is a foundation for healing." Rachel sat stiffly at the table, arms crossed, suspicion clouding her face. So that is the plan?
Good
Name it after your
job.
sister and make us the symbol?
Yay.
Grant shook his head. No faces, no media, no cameras,
darling,
just
I
people
missed
getting
you
what they
so
need,
much.
starting with you. She studied him for a long time, her
Mommy.
pride and fear clashing visibly. Finally, her voice broke. I do not want Ellie to think I failed her. Grant's eyes
Oh
softened.
my goodness.
She already thinks you are the bravest person alive.
alright?
So do
Yes,
I.
thank you.
Rachel blinked rapidly, her resistance faltering. She signed the papers slowly, not as surrender, but as the beginning of trust.
You are
The
experiencing an
foundation
autoimmune
launched
flare, and that is
quietly,
what causes the
its
exhaustion.
gears turning
The
without
exhaustion is a
fanfare.
direct result of the flare.
Hospitals, clinics, and therapists received discreet calls. Families long forgotten in waiting rooms were suddenly contacted.
I promise.
Real
you will
lives
not
began
fall again.
shifting, one by one, because of a little girl's whispered plea in a crowded gym. Meanwhile, life in the new apartment was reshaping
Yes,
itself
full
into something
coverage and a
resembling
nurse care
family.
package.
Ellie had started calling the place
We will
ours.
proceed as planned,
She explained
but no
it
further
simply one
discussion is
morning
needed.
while eating scrambled eggs. This is our kitchen, our couch, and
He
our
is
guest who
doing
never
too
leaves.
much.
Rachel smirked at the last part. He has a place of his own, remember? Yes, but ours has better snacks, Ellie said matter-of-factly. Grant chuckled and did not argue. He had not been back to his penthouse in days, and for the first time, he did not miss it. He took meetings from the
Promise you will
dining
not
table,
let her
sometimes
fall.
with Ellie popping her head into the camera, telling his colleagues he was on a secret mission. He let her,
I promise
and
you,
no
I
one
will
dared
not.
push back. The bracelets on his wrist multiplied. Ellie made another one from mismatched buttons and glittery string. One is not enough anymore, she said as she tied it
This
snugly.
foundation project
You are
represents a
double
new beginning
important
for our
now.
community.
Grant looked down at his wrist, the handmade tokens glowing beside his watch. He smiled softly. Then I will try to live up to it. That evening, they ate grilled cheese
No
sandwiches and tomato
Only
soup.
direct help.
Rachel apologized for being too simple. Grant, tasting warmth he had not known in years, told her it was perfect. After dinner, Ellie read aloud from her favorite book, her voice filled with drama and joy. When bedtime came, Rachel handed Grant a pillow. Your turn, she said.
Okay.
He raised an eyebrow. To
Yes,
do
this
what?
girl.
She likes a story
Oh my
before
goodness.
sleep. It does
This
not
is
have to
our
be
now.
good. It just has to be you. So he sat by Ellie's mattress and told her about the time he got locked in the school janitor's closet in second grade. She laughed until she snorted, and Rachel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling without apology.
I can't believe
Later,
that happened.
after lights were out, Ellie whispered, "You make me feel like I can still win." His throat caught and words failed, so he held her hand in silence, letting her know he
Here's that
believed it too.
Thank you for this.
That night, as he walked back to his car beneath a starry sky, he glanced upward. The wind had picked up, and he thought of the crooked wind chime Ellie had made, now hanging in his kitchen window. For the first time in years, the silence waiting for him no longer felt empty. It felt alive. The auditorium pulsed with anticipation. Programs
funny.
rustled in nervous hands.
You're right,
Shoes
that's
shuffled
hilarious.
against the polished floor,
Every
and a
morning
faint
I
buzz
woke
filled
up
the air as
and the
families
sun
whispered to
came
one another.
greet me.
Outside, Charleston bloomed
Here
in
is your
spring.
pillow.
But within
Thank
these
you.
walls, time felt suspended. Grant sat in the front row, his
that's when
hands
I
resting in his lap,
I had
the
swapped
two
my
bead
sister's
bracelets
lucky
around
charm
his
for a
wrist
payday.
brushing lightly against his Rolex. He was not fidgeting, but his fingers lingered on them as though drawing strength. Beside him, Rachel wore a cream blouse, her hair brushed neatly back, color in her cheeks once again. She no longer looked like someone fighting every day for survival. She looked like someone who had fought and won, now watching her daughter step into her own battle. The house lights dimmed, a hush rippled through the room. The principal gave her brief remarks about courage and growth before the curtain shifted, and the spotlight swept across the stage. Ellie stood at its center. Her braces still clung to her legs, partially hidden beneath a lavender dress sewn with small embroidered birds. The fabric shimmered as she moved, catching the light like wings. For a moment, she stood utterly still, her fingers trembling slightly at her side, her chest rising with a deep breath. Then the music began, soft piano notes that carried like a lullaby remembered. Ellie lifted her arms, slow and deliberate. She stepped, not with perfection but with honesty. Each motion was careful, infused with determination. She was not dancing to impress or to perform. She was dancing to speak, to remind herself and everyone watching that she had never stopped being whole. Midway through, she turned, and the fabric of her dress flared, catching the lights until the birds seemed to take flight. The audience exhaled together, many without realizing they had been holding their breath. Rachel pressed a hand to her heart, her other hand reaching instinctively for Grant's. He did not let go. "She's flying," Rachel whispered. Grant's voice was low but certain. "Yes, she is." The music swelled toward its end. Ellie's final pose was not grand but grounded, arms stretched upward toward something unseen. Her face lifted in quiet triumph. Silence followed, and then thunderous applause shook the room. It was not polite clapping. It was the kind of applause that came from deep in the chest, the kind given when people witness something sacred. Ellie bowed, her smile fragile at first, then blossoming into radiance. She scanned the crowd until she found them, her mother and Grant, both on their feet, both unable to stop smiling. She ran carefully, braces clicking but steady, straight into their arms. Rachel crouched low to embrace her, and Grant knelt beside them, arms wrapping around both. "You did it," Rachel whispered into her daughter's hair. "I felt like I could," Ellie breathed. As the crowd filed out, Grant stayed kneeling, Ellie leaning her head against his shoulder. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "I used to wonder if I mattered." His throat tightened, words heavy. "You are the reason I remembered how to live." The stage lights dimmed, the birds on her dress catching the last streak of glow, and somewhere deep in his memory, Grace seemed to smile again. The world outside had not changed, but their world had. Ellie returned to a new school soon after, one closer to home. On her first day, no one laughed when she walked through the doors with her walker. A girl offered to carry her tray at lunch. A boy shifted his seat so she could see the board better. Small gestures, but to Ellie, they were wings. At pickup, Rachel and Grant stood by the gate, watching her leave the building surrounded by chatter and sunlight. "You did not just give her help," Rachel said softly. "You gave her belonging." Grant did not answer right away. He watched Ellie's hair catch the afternoon light as she laughed with her classmates. Finally, his voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Then maybe I finally did something right." The days wove themselves into a rhythm. Therapy sessions, school pickups, dinners shared at the kitchen table. Grant found his life rearranging itself without permission, and he welcomed it. The penthouse still stood high above the city, silent and waiting, but he rarely returned. He preferred the clinking of Ellie's crutches, the sound of Rachel's laughter when she forgot to hold it back, the hum of life in a home that was not his but felt like it. One evening, Ellie sat cross-legged on the floor with construction paper and markers, creating another drawing. She handed it to Grant proudly. Two stick figures danced beneath a banner of stars, the words scrawled above, "We can fly." He tucked it into his pocket beside her bracelets, carrying it as though it were a compass. The Grace Project expanded quietly, reaching families Rachel remembered from long hours in waiting rooms. Parents received calls they never expected, support they had stopped hoping for. There were no press releases, no ribbon cuttings, only real changes that spread one by one. Grant reviewed every detail himself, every clause, every contract. For once, he was not building for shareholders. He was building for Grace, for Ellie, for Rachel, for the promise that no child would be left unseen again. One night, as Rachel sipped tea at the kitchen counter and Ellie prepared her school bag for the next day, Grant stood at the window, bracelets glittering against the city lights. Rachel glanced at him. "You could be anywhere in the world right now," she said softly. "But you are here." He turned, his voice steady. "There is nowhere else I want to be." Ellie overheard and grinned. "That is good, because you are ours now." Rachel smiled, a mixture of amusement and quiet acceptance. The words settled between them like a vow, unspoken yet binding. The true miracle was not in Ellie's steps on stage, though those steps mattered.
You are doing great.
It was in the way she laughed freely now, the way she dreamed without hesitation, the way she believed again. It was in the way Rachel stood taller, her shoulders less burdened. It was in the way Grant learned to sit at a table, not as a benefactor, but as family. The world had tested them, broken them, mocked them, but still they
You're doing
rose.
very well.
Together, they
Just a
stitched
few more
belonging out of
steps.
loss, hope out of despair, love out of fragments.
That's good.
And when
Now,
Ellie whispered
slowly,
before bed one
gently.
night, "Promise you will still be here in the morning," Grant's answer came without
We are going
hesitation.
to start with
Every
some
single
small
one.
goals.
He kept his word. There are stories that remind us of what it means to be human. Stories that rise out of ordinary places and reveal extraordinary truths. Ellie's journey was not just about braces and therapy or even the triumphant steps she took on stage. It was about something deeper, something many of us spend our lives searching for. It was about being seen, about being lifted when the world chooses to look away,
Oh my gosh.
about finding family not by blood, but by presence, by the unshakable promise that says, "I will not let you fall." Grant entered that school gym a man weighed down by loss, a man who had buried his grief behind glass windows and boardroom tables. He thought he had nothing to offer beyond numbers and influence. But then he heard a little girl whisper, "Please move." Those two words cracked open the silence he had carried for years. And suddenly, his life was no longer about
It's really nice
transactions
out
or
today.
contracts. It was about redemption.
Yes,
It
perfect
was
for a
about
walk.
turning regret into action, about stepping forward not for recognition, but because kindness demanded it. Rachel's strength, though cloaked in exhaustion, spoke of countless battles fought in the shadows. She held her world together with tape and faith, believing that love was enough to keep standing. What she did not expect was that love would circle back to her, carried by someone who refused to walk away this time. In the spaces between struggle and recovery, she found
Thank
not
you.
only
You are
support,
welcome.
but partnership. Not only survival, but a glimpse of what it meant to be carried too. And Ellie, with her crutches clicking and her eyes lit with determination, became more than a child learning to walk again. She became the proof that hope is not fragile. Hope is stubborn. It whispers through pain, it pushes through
everyone.
doubt, it
Hi.
rises even when mocked.
Hey.
Her
Hey,
every step was more than a physical act. It was a declaration,
Hello
"I am
there,
still
come on
here. I am
Hi.
still whole." And with
Why
each
don't you have
step,
a seat right
she
here?
taught the adults around her how to believe again. This story is not just theirs, it is ours. It reminds us that one act of courage can ripple into lives we may never see. It tells us that brokenness does not erase worth, that healing is not just medical
great.
but
I'll see you
human,
tomorrow then.
and
Yeah,
that
sounds good.
sometimes the most powerful legacies are born from promises whispered in the quiet promises we choose to keep. If this journey touched your heart, if you believe that kindness can change the course of a life, then join us. Let this not be just a story you watch and forget, but a story you carry forward.
Will you be
Subscribe
here
to
in the
Loss and Healing.
Always.
Share these stories and become part of a community that chooses hope, that chooses to see, that chooses to move, because healing begins with us all.